Hi, my name is Kiera, and I'll be presenting my thesis project titled At the Crossroads of Communism and Decolonization, the French and Algerian Communist Party's Divergent Decisions During the Algerian War of Independence, 1956. For the past 2 centuries, Algeria's geographical and historical position places it at the crossroads of 3 worlds: Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Its placement at this crossroads has been at the forefront of the events that have shaped its historical trajectory, including the Algerian War of Independence, which took place from 1954 to 1962. The French, who had claimed control over the country since 1830, Algeria wasn't a territory or a protectorate or even a colony. It was an extension of France itself. Indigenous Algerians instead cited Algeria's pre-colonial history and the atrocities committed by the French government over the past century in order to claim that Algeria was its own nation, from which the shackles of French rule must be cast off. But for communist parties in both countries, prior to the war, Algeria was a nation in formation, which was a phrase coined by French Communist Party leader Maurice Thorez. It was not quite French, but it also wasn't prepared for self-governance. So while Algeria sat at a crossroads of 3 worlds, the communists who were involved in the struggle sat at a crossroads as well, of the demands of international communism, the global tide of decolonization, as well as their own desire to participate in domestic politics. The French Communist Party, or the PCF, decided on March 12, 1956, to vote for special powers, which made the French government more capable of intervening in Algeria to suppress the revolution and prevent independence. In July, the Algerian Communist Party, or the PCA, decided to incorporate their armed wing into the armed wing of the National Liberation Front, or the FLN. In doing so, the PCA collaborated with the most prominent Algerian nationalist organization, while the PCF supported their enemy, the French government. Communist parties across the world theoretically had the same or similar ideologies, which were tied to Marxism-Leninism, amongst other sources and writings. One aspect of the communist ideology was anti-imperialism and the support of nationalist movements, according to the Manifesto of the Communist International in 1920. Another, however, is proletarian internationalism. If workers of the world should unite, was there a role for individual nationalisms in a communist future? Complicating the issue further was the problem of the nature of political parties, which are based in an ideology and yet also need to employ strategic means in order to ensure their own survival. So, with that in mind, how did these 2 important aspects of the parties, ideology and political strategy, interact to motivate their 2 opposing decisions about the Algerian War of Independence? To go over the concepts I'm using, ideology I've defined as a body of normative and normative-related ideas about the nature of man and society, as well as the organization and purposes of society. Strategy, on the other hand, refers to the methods and instruments of winning and exercising power. At their core, they represent guiding ideas versus the necessary action to support these guiding ideas. And it's for this reason that a political party can't have one without the other. My sources for this project primarily include newspaper articles, pamphlets, correspondence, and meeting agendas from both the PCA and the PCF, and I've also read various memoirs by party leaders. So to start by discussing the PCF and the Special Powers Decision of March 12, 1956, these headlines are all from the French communist newspaper L'Humanité between January and March 1956. As you can see, when the PCF voted for special powers, they believed, at least in the eyes of the public, that it would bring peace to Algeria. Inevitably, the special powers vote only increased violent repression. However, this was not its publicized goal. Nonetheless, a vote for special powers was a vote to increase French power in the colony, and not a vote for Algerian independence, which the PCF steered away from promoting publicly. So why would a communist party choose peace over revolution against repression? The French socialists were voted into power in January 1956, which gave the French Communist Party the hope for a new popular front, or a leftist government where the communists and socialists collaborated on policy, thus increasing the influence of the communists in parliament. The desire to get into the good graces of the socialists and agree on their position, which was to end the war in Algeria by any means necessary, was powerful enough for them to neglect the anti-imperialist principles of communism. PCF member André Moine said in his memoir, "The elected communists do not want to take responsibility for defeating the intentions of peace. They vote for special powers. They still hope to be able to influence the policy of the socialists in government." So to talk about the PCA for a moment, as expected, the sources for the Algerian Communist Party are far less accessible, and I haven't gone through as many of them yet. But so far, it seems that the PCF's pro-independence action and collaboration with the FLN was most likely influenced by the number of indigenous Algerians in this party, the direct experience of French repression, who banned the party in 1955, as well as adherence to the communist principle of supporting nationalist movements. So to wrap up, the two parties essentially shared the same overarching goals of survival and influence, but their differing domestic situations forced them to go about this very differently. Both were inherently power-seeking, but even the pursuit of power can be ideological. They both believed in the necessity of a communist party and its ideology. So survival for the PCF required making alliances with those in power, like the socialists. Survival for the PCA, on the other hand, was more of an immediate concern and meant fighting repression, which meant collaborating with the FLN. I hypothesize that the decisions of 1956 were the outcome of the two parties wanting to promote communism in their own country and navigating drastically different domestic circumstances in the attempt to achieve it. Thank you.